Hey guys, Charlie, quick and easy Mosin Nagant, do it yourself. Bend bolt video is what I'm putting out here. And I'm putting this out because if you look at do it yourself videos on YouTube on doing this project, taking your bolt and putting a bend on it so you can utilize an optic, you're going to find that there is some aftermarket bolts that you can put on there. I absolutely do not like them. They look really, really chintzy. And they basically, you screw it into the side of your bolt, and I think it's ATI that offers that. They're not expensive. They just, and I'm sure they work. They just kind of look haphazard. The guys out there that are making videos about doing it themselves, they do a good job in the video, but the problem I see with it is they end up with like a 5/16 or 3/8 inch bolt that they start with. And that, in my opinion, is going to give you a kind of flimsy feeling bolt when you go to grab it. There's an image right there of, right here, you can see this piece of all thread he's got hanging out of that. And that's all well and good, but that's a 5/16 diameter piece of all thread. So being as it's threaded top to bottom, you're going to have to do some grinding on it to take that off there. Or it's going to be like the most painful bolt action rifle in the world if you don't. So he's going to, whittle that thing down even a little bit more. And I can't help but think that it's going to do nothing but flex when he goes to cycle that bolt, and that's not fun. So I'm going to basically show you how I did my own do-it-yourself project using a little bit heavier bolt inside of, or for the handle on my bolt for the Mosin, and tell you that how I did it and the tools I used to do it. Everything that I used is sitting on this table right here, right now, except for two items. One of them is a vise, and you will definitely need a vise to do this project. The other is a grinding wheel that has a wire wheel at the other end of it. That isn't necessary to do this project. Besides that vise, everything that's sitting here, you can pick up and do this project yourself. The wire wheel is kind of nice if you want to polish it up a little bit. The grinding wheel is nice if you want to remove a bunch of material. I did on my bolt because it was initially just round, obviously because the bolt I used was round. And I didn't like that look because it kind of made me think of a bolt sticking out of the side of my bolt. So I wanted to flatten it out and give it an edge here, and then flatten out the bottom of it as well and give it edges on each side. Something a little more, a little more actual factory bolt looking type of a handle for that. So what I did is, and quickly, I'll make this as short as I possibly can. I took my bolt, I put it into the vise. The bolt that was sticking out of there, the Mosin bolt, roughly about that size right there. I cut the head of it off first, the round knob off of it first with my Dremel tool with a cutoff wheel. Once the head was, I drilled that head off there, I put it to the side. Then I went to work cutting off the rest of the bolt handle itself. This part's kind of critical, so be very, very cautious when you're cutting the final portion of your bolt off. And if you're like me, when this is stock, if you grab your Mosin bolt right now and look at it, you're going to see a shoulder. I mean, you have this area here and then a shoulder that comes up a little ways. Then the shaft of the current bolt takes off from there and comes out, whatever, 2 inches or so, and then you have the ball at the end of it. I wanted to keep as much of this shoulder as I possibly could because I feel like the more meat you can drill into, the more sturdy that bolt handle is going to be, and the more secure it's going to be put into place. And as you can see here, I've got about a 1/16 of an inch is all. Hopefully you can see that. 1/16 of an inch is all of that shoulder left. Now, initially I had about an 1/8 of an inch of it left, but because it's kind of difficult to drill without a drill press, the hole that you need to put that bolt in, I got a little too close to the edge, and I ended up having to grind this down because when I tapped it, I was getting some tapping marks on the outside back of this bolt. So I ground this down a little bit. I still kept about a 1/16 of an inch of that, and it seems to be plenty strong as it is right there. So cut your head off, cut it off at the base. Use another grinding wheel. In this case, I just used a little sander and sanded it level, and then I could begin the process of drilling a hole in my bolt itself. To do that, I use two different bits. I use the smaller bit. I believe this one is like maybe 3/16. This I used as a pilot hole because you don't want to just start drilling into it with your full diameter, in this instance, a 3/8 inch drill bit, because if you do, it's going to wander on you. So I started with a smaller bit. I used a punch just to make a little indentation, and then began with this. Once I had a nice little hole developed, I switched to the 3/8 bit. Now, when you do switch to the 3/8 bit, you want to keep a couple things in mind. One, you want to make sure that you're deep enough to accommodate, several threads of your bolt, and that can be as little as a 1/4 inch, but you have about a 1/2 inch to work with. This piece of metal right here to the shoulder is just about 1/2 inch. You definitely do not want to go beneath this spot right here, because you're going to start to get into the bolt itself, and you don't want to do that. So in this instance, even with that minuscule amount of shoulder I have left there, I have about a 1/2 inch. If I have a 1/4 inch worth of threads in there, I'm happy with that. However, even to get a 1/4 inch of threads, you're going to have to drill nearly all the way down, because your tap is tapered, and once it gets down, to, let's say, if I want a 1/4 inch that deep, I'm going to have to drill it that deep, because this part down here isn't cutting into the side of that bolt. So I drilled this almost all the way, that 1/2 inch mark. Then when I started to make my 3/8 inch hole, I put a piece of tape on here just to make sure that I wouldn't go any deeper than that right there. I knew it was a guide for me where to stop. So once I have a hole drilled in it, I use the aforementioned tap, and it's just a laborious process of setting that in there, getting it as vertical as you can, and then start slowly turning, maybe dropping a little bit of oil in here and there, just to help it go through. Back and forth. If you haven't tapped anything before, you go a little bit, you back it off, and you let some of the shavings get into these grooves, and then keep going down. Once you have it tapped, I quickly took the bolt and made sure it fit in there. I made sure I had the 7/16 by 14 threads. Once it was confident that it was going to fit in there, I basically took the bolt and set it aside, because I'm pretty much done with it for a little while at that point. The next step is going to be determining how much angle you want on your bolt and how to bend it. I was really worried that with that heavy a bolt, that this Burns-O-Matic little cheapo torch for like $11 was not going to get this hot enough in order to help me bend it. And the company I work for, we have a maintenance shop that has an acetylene torch in it that I could have used, and I know that will do it. But in all reality, with about 3 or 4 minutes of this at the spot where I wanted to bend, it was bendable. I just used a cheater bar and bent it, and I was really happy because I didn't have to go down to our shop. So if you have one of these laying around, it will do the job. You're going to put the bolt itself into your vise, and then I'll put some pictures in this video because I did take some stills of that, and then just let it get hot. And it's not going to glow red. It's not going to be hot enough to bend just by grabbing a pair of pliers and tweaking it over. So you're probably going to have to use something like this. This is just a 3-foot long piece of square tubing that I used as a cheater bar to put it on in the vise and then bend it over to the way I wanted it. Now you're going to want to, this is your bolt vertically straight up. I mean, you're going to want at some point this thing to come down, about a left-hand turn, about a 90-degree bend in there. So when it closes, when you have it closed, it's going to be tight against the side of your rifle. So this first initial bend, you can do just a straight 90-degree bend, just an L shape in it. And if for whatever reason you don't like it, or you want it to be a little more aggressive or a little less aggressive, you can always go back, reheat it, use your cheater bar, and tweak it a little bit more. For me, I bent it at this 90 degrees. Then you have to end up cutting it back a little bit and then rethreading the bolt, because if you just screw it in there as is from the hardware store, with that bend in there, it is going to put the bend further forward than you want it to be. So, and what I mean by that is you screw this in right after the 90 degrees bent. Well, your bend actually ends up coming up about an inch. So it's up, up an inch and then a 90-degree bend using the threads that were on the bolt from the hardware store, because you just can't get a bend low enough to do much less than that. So I bent it at 90 degrees. I took my Dremel with a cutoff wheel and I cut all but about 3/8 of an inch of what remained, or what was past that 90-degree bend, and I re-tapped it with, I re-threaded it with this die right here, and it's a 7/16 14 die. Very, very simple. This isn't a grade 8 or a grade 5 bolt. It's just a mild steel bolt, so it was no problem re-threading it. Once I had it re-threaded, I inserted it. It's time to grab the bolt again. I inserted it back in there and put it in my gun, and determined I like the fact that it was almost vertical on the side of the wood stock of the gun. So I knew I had my bend. I know I had the thread rights. My holes are good. So now I'm going to determine if I want this to just come straight down and have a knob, or do I want a little flare out, or how I'm going to make that work. And that's just trial and error. I mean, you by this point in time, you're already going to be somewhat of an expert at bending this kind of steel. So you can insert the bolt into your gun and determine if you like the way it lays, or if you want it, determine how long you want it to be, or whatever the case may be, and go back and forth and until you're happy with the way it fits in there and happy with the way it lays on the side of your gun. For me, this length was, I'm going to put it into the gun now so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. For me, this length was perfect. I know there's a lot of them out there that they extend this thing all the way out, almost past the magazine well, and I don't like that. That's not comfortable for me. I don't want to reach down to grab it. At this length here, it's kind of at the top of my trigger, so I pull the trigger and it's a piece of cake for me to get up there, find that bolt, and then slide it back and rack another round in there. So this is about the length I determined I wanted it. I cut it off at that end, and that's when it's time to grab your little round knob once again. So with that round knob, it's perfectly round. I put it in the vise, and then I drilled a pilot hole in it first, then the 3/8 inch hole. Then I took my tap again and drilled put some threads into that. The end of my bolt here, I used the same die, and I put some threads onto this bolt and the actual handle itself. Screwed this on, but when I put this on, I used just massive amounts of force because I wanted this as tight as possible. I put some JB weld in there with it as well because I don't ever want to take it off. And but when I did that, naturally you put this into a vise, it's going to leave some marks on it. And I didn't want just a perfectly round knob at the end of it. So again, I used my Dremel with this little sanding dealio and just kind of made a barrel shape out of it. And on the bottom, whoops, bust my window out there. On the bottom of it, I just flattened it off, so I had kind of a barrel shape to it. So the length of it I like. The projection out from the side of the stock is what I was after. The height off my trigger is what I was after. The only thing that I changed after this point in time was when I was done, and I'll put some pictures of that in there as well, to this point, it was still round. It was just perfectly round like a hardware store bolt, and I didn't want that. So I flattened out the top. I marked where the threads were, and I flattened it out all the way up to those threads on the top as well as underneath on the bottom, just to give me two flat edges. And then I just made sure it wasn't really sharp on the sides, a nice little rounded corner, kept the rounding on the side, but now it's just a really comfortable. I can grab it in any angle, and it feels beefy because it's a 7/16 bolt rather than a 5/16 or a 3/8. Once I had this flattened out, I had the bolt made it, or the ball made into a little barrel. Was confident that it was going to, when I tightened it, it was going to be at the maximum tightness right about at this angle it's at now. And if it's not, you can adjust. You can add another thread into the barrel itself. You can cut a thread off of the bolt itself. But you definitely want to make sure when that thing is tightening up naturally that it gets really difficult, like way back here, and then you gotta work it to get it to this point here. Now, I mean, if for some reason you can't do that, don't worry about it, because you can use JB Weld and put it in there, and it's going to, even if there was no threads in there, it's probably going to hold that thing fairly permanently. But if you do it this way, you don't have to rely on a chemical. You can tighten it up as tight as you possibly can, and just use a little bit of Loctite, and that sucker isn't going anywhere. I mean, I literally was pounding on this morning forward, trying to get that to bust and get those threads, get this to unthread, and I couldn't get it out of there. So the one good thing about using Loctite, though, is if I ever wanted to change this out, I could put this handle into a vise or the bolt into a vise and use a cheater bar or a hammer and just pound on it until it would break that thread lock, and it would be able to come out. So anyway, once I had achieved everything that I wanted, my bend, is this going to show up here? My bend, the closeness to the side of the stock, the height off of the trigger, I put a little bit of it further bent to project it out a little bit more, just so I could easily get my hand underneath there when I was working the action. And once all that was done, and I put the flat faces on the top and the bottom, I decided I didn't want it chrome or whatever the zinc finish is that's on these bolts. Not to mention that when you heat it up, it's going to discolor somewhat. Now you can sit there and you can buff on it all day long, and you can get a nice, shiny type finish like that, similar to what the rest of the bolt looks like. But personally, I didn't really care if it was silver, and I decided I was going to blue it instead. And as you can see, the bluing pretty much matches the bluing on the magazine as well as the bluing on the bolt itself. So I think it's kind of a nice little contrast, and I'm a lot more confident in the durability of this bolt now because it's got bluing on it. It'll help prevent it from rusting and things like that. I use the Perma Blue to do that. And if you read those instructions, they're going to tell you to take a Q-tip or something like that and then put on a coat, let it dry for a minute or sink in for a minute, and then rinse it off with cold water, which is all well and good. I've done it before that way, and it's fine. And I ended up putting 45 coats on there because I wanted it darker. And what I found is if you just fill up a little dish with this, and in the case of this bolt, I actually used a ketchup, little ketchup dispenser or picnic type bottle that you would put ketchup in that has a little squirty knob or squirty do at the top of it. And I could pour the Perma Blue in there, put the bolt in there, shake it up, get it nice and drenched in the bluing, and then squirt what was left in the ketchup tube back into the Perma bottle so I could reuse it. So the disadvantage doing that, I don't think they recommend doing that, immersing it in it, but it definitely works. It gets it really, really dark. The disadvantage is that if you do it the slow way, it doesn't leave any residue and it doesn't get your hands all filthy. If you do it that way where you immerse or just dunk it in the bluing, it gets really dark, but then you get it wiping off onto your hands a little bit, the black or the bluing. But you can just wipe it down and it'll eventually just go away. So I did put a little notch in the side of the stock right there, just so this fits nice and tightly against it, and it does. And I couldn't be happier with it. Now all I have to do is get a proper mount for it, and I can put a scope on there. So all that being said, the tools that you'll be using, I'll just run through them real quick. So if you're trying to make a list of what you'll need, here you go. Again, what's not shown is the vise. You'll definitely need something to put your bolt in so you can heat it up and bend it. And the rest of the materials that you will need are sitting here right in front of you. I told you that steel was mild steel on the bolt. Well, guess what? It's even more mild steel, it seems to me, the actual Russian bolt itself. It went through, this cobalt covered bit was absolutely overkill because it went through this like it was butter. And I don't know the grade of the steel. Obviously, it's a mild steel. But just your standard drill bit that says will cut metal on the packaging will be ample to cut into this. And if I can use this little cheapo Makita home size, kitchen repair size drill to drill into that tells you that it's not super hardened steel. But this is all I used. If you have a drill press or access to one, you can be really precise on where you put that hole. And again, in our shop, we do have one, but I wanted to kind of do it in a quick and easy way, and I wanted to see if this drill was going to be up to the challenge. It absolutely was. Dremel or some other kind of cutout device, obviously really necessary because you're going to be doing some cutting on your bolt. I went through like 2 of these little cutting wheels, and to get the project finished, and then about 3 or 4 of these little sanding wheels get the shape on it that I wanted. And then again, your tap and die set, you have to have them. You're not going to be able to do this project without them. And if you don't have one, to pick up a set, they're as little as $29. But I'm sure everybody knows somebody that's a weekend mechanic who has a tap and die set laying around, and you can just borrow the 7/16 die and the 7/16 tap, and you can go to town. I don't know if it is possible to go bigger. I mean, as you can see right there, that it is going to be difficult to get any larger diameter bolt than that inside of that. Now, I thought about a shoulder bolt, and for those of you who don't know what those are, they're a fat diameter bolt that necks down where the threads are. And in that respect, I could get a 3/4 inch diameter bolt that is necked down to a 7/16 thread. If I did that, there ain't no way on God's green earth this little Burns-O-Matic is going to heat it up enough for me to bend that heavy of a bolt. So I would have to, employ the use of an acetylene torch. But I'm really, really happy with the strength of this. I mean, it just feels rock solid. It feels every bit as solid as the bolt that was there. And I think it is an adequate diameter. That 7/16 is an adequate diameter. But please keep in mind, if you throw a 3/16 or a 3/8 in there, especially if you're deciding to use all thread because it's threaded all the way up and you think you're going to save yourself some time tapping and dyeing, or you don't want to buy a tap and a dye, I'm guaranteeing you a 3/8 or a 5/16 diameter is going to flex every time you try to cycle that bolt. And Mosin Nagants, they cock on the lift up, so every time you lift that bolt up, it's cocking the bolt. And you know how difficult it can be at times to get that bolt up. I mean, it's a hard pull, or hard push rather, to cock that bolt. So you want this to be as absolutely beefy as possible, so you don't run into any snags with it down the road. So that pretty much wraps up. And the only other thing I didn't really cover is I used Loctite once I had it set to the place I want. I'm gonna give you a little closer look at the bolt itself. I got two cameras here, is why I'm holding this low and then high. You can see, I left kind of the rounded sides on there, and it's not perfect. I mean, I didn't go to great lengths to make sure every little blemish or tool mark was out of it. Again, flattening off the top and the bottom gives me a little different look than just a bolt. I'll put it in the gun for you real quick here again. So what I was saying is, clear. So let me, like I was saying, when you cock these, there's a trigger pull. But I mean, this is when it recocks, is when you lift up, and you can see that there's quite a bit of force you're generating to cock that. So if this is a 3/8 or 5/16, it's going to want to flex, and that 7/8 or 7/16 bolt, it doesn't do anything at all. It's just rock solid. So. Yeah, that's the Mosin project. So all total cost wise, if you have the stuff here in front of you, you're a 79-cent bolt and about 2 hours worth of work. If you don't have this stuff here, borrow it from somebody. But it is a minimal amount of tools that you'll need to work on something like that. But if you look at some of the other bolts or aftermarket bolts that are out there, they're kind of cruddy. I mean, I think ATI has one that. It actually bolts into, it's a nut that goes into the side, and then it drops 90 degrees down, and it looks kind of hokey. You can send your bolt off to a service, and for anywhere from $50 to $100, they'll send it back to you with a bent bolt already put on there, which is definitely an option. But you know what? They're fun guns. They're fun to work on, and seriously, if you screw up that bolt, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, because you can order a new bolt for your Mosin for pretty cheap, probably around $30 or $35 will get you a brand new bolt, a brand new replacement, I should say. So if you're dabbling in gun experiments, it's the perfect gun to work on because you know, even if you destroy the thing, you're out $100. But you won't. I mean, take your time and enjoy it, and you know, give yourself a rifle that you have more options with now. I'm really curious to put a scope on here to see what it can do. Can I get it out there to 500 yards and have a nice group with it? Who knows? So hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions on this bolt, on how to do it, just email me, info@wideawakenews.com, and I'll do my best to try to answer any questions I might not have answered in making of this video. All right, guys, have a good one. Hope you enjoyed.